I still remember the way the lights twinkled in Ethan's living room that evening, the kind of glow you only see around Christmas. The smell of cinnamon candles lingered in the air, and for a moment I almost felt like I belonged there. Almost. I sat down carefully on the leather couch, the one I'd helped pick out last spring when Claire insisted their old one looked too dated. My knees creaked the way old wood does when it's been bent too long, but I smiled anyway. I wanted this visit to feel warm like the holidays used to be. I leaned back, looked at my son, and said something that had been sitting heavy on my chest since Linda passed. I was thinking, I began, maybe this year I could bring the roast. You know, the one your mom used to make. The recipe with the garlic rub and sage. She always said it tasted better the next day. Maybe I could bring it and we could all share it at Christmas. For a moment, silence. Ethan rubbed his hands together nervously, his wedding band catching the glow of the 12-foot Christmas tree in the corner. He glanced toward the kitchen where Claire's voice floated faintly, laughing on the phone with someone. He swallowed hard. "Dad," he said finally, "this year it's better if you don't come." At first I thought I'd misheard. My hearing isn't what it used to be, but those words, they landed sharp and clear. "What do you mean don't come?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Ethan shifted on the couch, shoulders tightening like a boy bracing for punishment. "Claire's parents are staying with us this year. They don't feel comfortable with too many people around. It's just easier this way." Easier. That word cut like glass. I looked around the room, my eyes falling on the crown molding along the ceiling, the hardwood floor under my boots, the silk curtains draped across the windows. Every corner of that house carried a piece of me, my labor, my sacrifices, my money. And here was my son telling me there was no room for me. "You can't ban a man from the house he built," I whispered, my voice trembling as I looked at him. Then I shook my head, forcing the words out louder. "Unless you're his own son." Ethan flinched, but he didn't answer. He just stared down at the marble coffee table, the one I'd taken out a second mortgage to pay for. Like maybe if he kept staring at it, he wouldn't have to see me. I felt the air grow heavy. Memories of Christmases past rushed through me. Linda humming off-key while basting the roast, Ethan sneaking pieces of pie before dinner, laughter echoing through a house that didn't have much but always felt full. And now here I was, a stranger in the very family I'd bled myself dry to support. "Where do you expect me to spend Christmas?" I asked softly, my throat tightening. Ethan's face twisted, shame flashing across his features. "Maybe you could visit Aunt Rosa, or maybe we can do something the weekend after." The weekend after, like Christmas, could be penciled in whenever it was convenient. I stood up, my body heavier than it had ever felt. My hand lingered on the doorknob, cool against my palm. I didn't turn back. "Tell Claire's parents," I said quietly, "Merry Christmas." The December air slapped me in the face as I stepped outside. Behind me I heard Ethan call my name once, then the sharp click of the door closing. Final. Absolute. I walked slowly to my truck, the Christmas lights from the house glowing behind me, warm and inviting for everyone except me. For a moment I just stood there, staring at that perfect little picture, a family gathered, laughter spilling out from behind the walls I had built for them. And yet I was the ghost standing outside. When I slid into the driver's seat, I didn't start the engine right away. My hands rested on the wheel, fingers trembling. Across the street, I watched another family hang a star on their porch. A father lifted his little girl onto his shoulders, her tiny hands reaching out with excitement. My throat burned. Once upon a time that had been me and Ethan, before Claire, before everything changed. Finally, I turned the key and the old truck growled awake. The heater hummed as I pulled away from the curb, the streets lined with houses glowing in holiday cheer. But in that cab, all I felt was silence, a silence so loud it pressed against my chest, making it hard to breathe. By the time I got home, my porch light was flickering again, same as it had for months. I hadn't fixed it, not because I didn't want to, but because every extra dollar had gone into Ethan's life. I stood there for a long time, looking at that dim bulb struggling to stay alive, and thought about myself. How long had I been flickering just like that light, pouring out what little I had left until there was nothing left to give? Inside, the house was cold, too quiet. Linda's photo on the mantel smiled back at me, soft and steady, as if she knew the storm that was building inside me. I whispered to her, "He said I'm not welcome, Linda. Not in the house we built. Not at the table you used to bless with your cooking." I sat down at the kitchen table with a stale sandwich, the bread rough and dry. I chewed slowly, forcing it down. And that's when the thought hit me, not just about Christmas, but about everything that had led to this moment. 5 years. 5 years of sacrifice. 5 years of paying their mortgage, of eating cheap meals so they could host dinners with French wine and designer china. 5 years of patching up my old boots while they posted photos of vacations I could never afford. And now I wasn't even welcome. The sandwich turned to dust in my mouth. I set it down, staring at the wall as anger, sorrow, and something darker swirled in my chest. For the first time in a long time, I felt the weight of it all pressing down, threatening to crush me. That was the night I realized the story wasn't about the roast. It wasn't even about Christmas. It was about what happens when sacrifice turns invisible, when love is mistaken for obligation, when respect dies quietly in the corner while everyone else keeps celebrating. And that's where the real story begins. If you've ever felt pushed aside by the very people you gave everything to, if you've ever tasted that kind of loneliness on a holiday when you should have been surrounded by family, then you'll understand what came next. Stick with me. Because the truth I uncovered, the choices I made after that night, they changed everything. And I promise, you won't forget what happened when I finally decided I'd had enough. When I got home that night, after Ethan told me I wasn't welcome for Christmas, I sat down at my kitchen table with a stale sandwich and just stared at it. The crust was rough, the bread dry, but I chewed it anyway. And as I sat there, the weight of the last 5 years came rushing back to me like a storm. 5 years. That's how long I'd been bleeding myself dry so Ethan and Claire could live the kind of life I never dreamed of for myself. It all started with that down payment. They came to me one evening, hands clasped, faces full of hope. "Dad, this is the house," Ethan said, showing me glossy photos of a 2-story with hardwood floors and a backyard big enough for barbecues. Claire chimed in about how perfect it was for hosting her family, for entertaining, for building our future. But futures cost money. They didn't have enough for the down payment. I did. I remember sitting at my kitchen table, papers spread out, the bank officer's words echoing in my ears. "Mr. Jensen, are you sure? At your age, pulling equity from your home is risky." Risky, maybe. But in that moment, all I saw was my boy finally getting a chance to stand on solid ground. I thought about Linda, how she always wanted Ethan to start his marriage with more than we had. And I signed the papers. $45,000 gone in the blink of an eye. That was the first cut. The mortgage payments were the second. Month after month, $2,800 left my account. At first, I thought I could manage. I had some savings. I tightened my belt, gave up little luxuries. It felt worth it. But as months turned to years, the sacrifices piled higher than the bills. I stopped buying new clothes. My winter coat had holes in the lining, but I told myself it still kept me warm enough. My boots split at the seams, so I wrapped them with duct tape. Friends invited me fishing, but I turned them down. Couldn't afford the gear, couldn't afford the gas. Dinner became ramen noodles, peanut butter sandwiches, canned soup. I cut coupons, waited for sales, shopped at discount stores. One night I counted the coins in a jar just to make sure I had enough for milk. Meanwhile, I'd scroll through my phone and see photos of Ethan and Claire smiling with champagne glasses raised high, celebrating a new promotion. The caption read, "A promotion that came with a trip to Napa Valley with bottles of French wine stacked on the counter." I remember once eating cold soup straight from the can because I didn't want to waste electricity heating it. That same evening, Claire posted about their new kitchen gadget, a professional-grade espresso machine. $1,200, stainless steel and gleaming, used maybe twice before it became another decoration on the counter I'd paid for. The contrast became unbearable. I sat at my cracked kitchen table with a dry sandwich while they toasted guests over a marble dining table. That table, that entire room, the chandelier, the flooring, the wine rack, was mine in everything but name. One night, as I bit into bread so stale it scratched my throat, I whispered to myself, I ate stale bread so they could sit at a marble table, but now that table doesn't even have a seat for me. The truth of that sentence sank in like a stone. It wasn't just about money. It was about invisibility. When Ethan was a boy, every dollar I spent felt like an investment in him. A new pair of cleats for Little League, a bike for Christmas, his college textbooks. Back then, I never once thought of it as sacrifice. It was love, but now it felt like I had become nothing more than an ATM with calloused hands. They didn't see the cold nights I spent with the heater turned low, wrapped in blankets to save on bills. They didn't see me patching my coat or eating crackers for dinner. They only saw the steady flow of money, never-ending, unquestioning. And the cruelest part was how normal it became for them. No one ever said, "Dad, are you okay? Do you have enough for yourself?" No one ever offered to skip a dinner party or cut back on the luxuries. Instead, the expectation grew. Every request was delivered with the same sweet tone, the same smile, as though I should be grateful for the chance to keep giving. I remember one Thanksgiving when I brought over a pie I'd made from scratch. Claire took one look and said, "That's sweet, Harold, but we already ordered desserts from the French bakery downtown." My pie sat untouched on the counter while they cut into their imported tarts. I wrapped it up and took it home later, eating it cold at my own table. That night, I realized it wasn't just money I was losing, it was dignity. 5 years of sacrifice, and not once did they invite me to sit proudly at the head of that table. I wasn't a father to them anymore. I was a shadow, and shadows don't get a seat at Christmas. The longer I thought about it, the angrier I became. Not the kind of anger that burns hot and fast, but the slow, steady kind that gnaws at your bones. I thought about Linda, about how she used to say, "Respect is the only inheritance worth leaving." And I wondered what she'd think if she could see Ethan now, living in a house his father bought, but treating that same father like a burden. I sat there in my dim kitchen, lights flickering overhead, staring at the empty plate where my sandwich had been. The silence pressed in heavy, and for the first time, I asked myself a question I'd been avoiding. Had I given so much that I'd erased myself completely? The more I thought about it, the more I realized the answer was yes. And that was the night something broke inside me. Not the quiet kind of breaking I'd felt before, but a sharp, jagged snap. Because sacrifices only mean something when they are seen, when they are respected, and mine had turned invisible. But the worst wound wasn't the stale bread or the cold house. It was what came after the words, the ones Claire would throw at me, slicing deeper than any unpaid bill ever could. I thought the stale bread and the silence were the hardest parts, but I was wrong. The real pain wasn't in the sacrifices I made. It was in the words that came after. Words that didn't just sting for a moment but cut deep enough to echo long after the call ended. It was 2 nights after that Christmas rejection. My phone lit up with Claire's name. For a second, I hesitated. Usually, she only called when they needed something. Money, rides, favors. Rarely a hello. Rarely a "How are you, Harold?" But I answered anyway, habit, I guess. "Hi, Harold." She sang into the phone, her voice sugar-coated, too sweet. The kind of sweetness that rots your teeth if you hold it too long. "Hello, Claire," I said cautiously. She launched right in her tone, lilting like she was giving me a compliment, but the knife was already hidden in her hand. "We were just talking about the holidays. You know, about traditions, and it's funny, we were laughing about your kind of food, the way you cook." I tightened my grip on the phone. "What do you mean, my kind of food?" "Oh, don't get me wrong," she continued quickly. "It's charming, very working class. You know, those heavy meals, roasts and potatoes and pies. Comfort food. But Ethan's family has grown into something a little more sophisticated, don't you think? My parents prefer lighter dishes, more refined, the kind you pair with a Bordeaux." I stayed silent. I could hear the smile in her voice. She wanted me to react, wanted me to feel small. She pressed on. "And the stories you tell, Harold, about your shop, about laying tile, fixing cabinets, it's cute. But sometimes I wonder, do you realize nobody in the room can relate to that anymore? My dad talks about his years studying in Paris. My mom tells stories about working at the embassy. That's the level our friends are used to." There it was, the line she wanted to draw. Her world, their class, and me, just the man who laid tile and cooked heavy meals. I could feel heat creeping up my neck, the same kind of heat I used to get when I was a boy, standing outside the principal's office waiting to be scolded. But I wasn't a boy anymore. I was a man who had built his own life with his own hands, and still in her voice I was being reduced to nothing. "You know," Claire went on, lowering her tone like she was sharing a secret, "I'll tell you something, at least Linda knew her place. She didn't try to push too hard, didn't make anyone uncomfortable. She just blended in. That's why people respected her." The room spun around me, my chest tightened. For a moment I couldn't breathe. She said Linda's name, my Linda, my wife. Gone all these years, but still the anchor in my heart. Claire had dragged her into this, turned her memory into a weapon. I closed my eyes, her face flashing in my mind, Linda at the stove, flour on her hands, her laugh filling the kitchen, her patience, her warmth. Claire's words twisted that memory, tried to stain it. Something inside me snapped. "Don't you dare," I said, my voice lower than I'd ever heard it. "Don't you dare use Linda's name to prop yourself up." There was silence on the line. I pressed on, my voice breaking but steady enough to land the blow. Linda had more class in her silence than you'll ever have in your entire life. For once, Claire didn't have a comeback. She huffed, muttered something under her breath, then the line went dead. I set the phone down, my hands shaking. The house was quiet, but inside me the words still rattled, not just hers, but mine. I'd never spoken to her like that before. For years I'd bitten my tongue, swallowed the disrespect. But Linda's memory, that was sacred, untouchable. I sat there a long time, staring at the wall, listening to the old clock tick in the corner. The anger rose, but beneath it was something worse. A deep, bone-level sadness. Because here was the truth. Claire had said out loud what they'd all been thinking, that I didn't belong anymore, that my food, my stories, my presence were out of place in their polished, curated world, that even Linda in death had been reduced to a footnote. I thought back to the dinners when she was still alive. She used to serve roasts with mashed potatoes, apple pie cooling on the counter. She'd hum along to Bing Crosby while we set the table. Ethan would sneak bites and we'd all laugh when Linda caught him. That was respect. That was love. And now it had been rewritten as simple, working class, less than. I wanted to believe Ethan didn't feel the same way, that this was just Claire running her mouth. But the silence was damning. He never defended me, never said Claire enough. His silence told me everything I needed to know. That night I poured myself a glass of cheap whiskey, the kind I'd bought in bulk to save money. I sat in the dark, the glass heavy in my hand, and whispered to Linda's photo. "They think I'm beneath them, they think you were too." My throat tightened. "But they are wrong, you were the best of us." I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, Claire's words came back sharper than before. At least Linda knew her place. Her place. Linda's place was at the head of our table, laughing with Ethan, loving us fiercely. Her place was in every corner of this home, in the recipes she left behind, in the memories stitched into the very walls. And if they couldn't see that, then maybe it was time I stopped letting them walk all over me. The next morning I woke up with a pounding in my chest, not just anger but resolve. For years I'd been giving, bending, breaking. I told myself it was for Ethan, for family, for love. But now I could see it clearly. Love without respect is just servitude. As I sat down with my coffee, I pulled out the folder I'd kept buried in the drawer. Receipts, bank statements, mortgage documents, every transfer, every bill I'd covered. My life's work on paper. I spread them out on the table, the same table where Linda used to serve dinner, and I stared at the numbers. More than $200,000. My savings, my retirement, my sweat. My years, all funneled into a house that had no room for me. I rubbed my hands over my face, the roughness of my palms reminding me of every hour I'd worked to earn that money. And I thought about what Claire said, about Linda, about respect. That was the morning I knew things couldn't stay the same. The words had cut deeper than the sacrifices ever did, and they left me with only one choice: to stop being silent, to stop being invisible. Because if they thought I was just a wallet, they were about to find out I was still a man. That night, after the call with Claire, I couldn't sleep. Her words kept bouncing around in my head, sharp and poisonous. At least Linda knew her place. Every time I closed my eyes, it was like she whispered it again, dragging Linda's name through the dirt. So I got up. The house was cold, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones, but I didn't bother with the heater. I walked straight to the old drawer in the kitchen and pulled it open. Inside was the folder I'd been avoiding for years. I carried it to the table and laid it down like it weighed 100 pounds. And in a way, it did, because everything inside was my life, my sweat, my years. I opened it and there they were, receipts, transfer slips, mortgage statements. Page after page of numbers, each one a cut I'd let them take. $45,000 for the down payment. Another $2,800 each month. Insurance premiums I'd quietly covered. Repairs I'd paid out of pocket. Little emergencies that drained me while they smiled for pictures at dinner parties. I pulled out my old calculator, the kind with yellowed keys, the screen scratched from years of use. My hands shook as I punched in the numbers. 45,000 plus 2,800 times 60 months plus repairs plus insurance. When the total flashed on the screen, my chest tightened. $206,400. I sat back in the chair, staring at the number glowing on that little plastic screen. Over $200,000. Gone, poured into a house where I wasn't welcome. I let out a bitter laugh. Not because it was funny, but because sometimes laughter is the only thing standing between you and tears. I rubbed my eyes, trying to push the sting away. Out of habit, I picked up my phone, scrolled through social media, and there it was, Claire smiling in a sun hat on a beach somewhere, holding a glass of something fancy. Much needed getaway with my love, the caption read. Ethan was next to her, sunglasses on, grinning wide. Behind them stretched out white sand, blue water, luxury. My stomach twisted. While I sat here in a drafty kitchen, eating sandwiches made from wee-cold bread, they were sipping cocktails by the ocean, and every penny of it came from me. I slammed the phone down, the screen face first on the table. For a long time I just sat there, the silence loud in my ears. My breathing grew heavier until finally I muttered out loud, enough. I reached for the phone again, but this time, not to scroll, I dialed the bank. My fingers trembled not from fear but from something I hadn't felt in a long time, resolve. The line clicked. A voice came on, polite, professional. This is First National. How can I help you tonight? I cleared my throat. My name's Harold Jensen. I'm calling about the mortgage transfer to Ethan and Claire Jensen. Yes, Mr. Jensen. We have you listed as guarantor. How can we assist? My voice was steady now, stronger than I expected. Cancel the transfer, effective immediately. No more payments from my account, not another dime. The woman hesitated. Mr. Jensen, are you sure? This will put their account. I said cancel it. I didn't raise my voice, but the firmness in it surprised even me. They'll figure it out. It's not my responsibility anymore. There was another pause, then the click of keys. Understood, sir. The transfer will be canceled, effective immediately. I hung up the phone and leaned back, my heart pounding. For the first time in years, I felt something break free inside me, like chains loosening, like a man standing tall again after being bent for too long. I looked at the pile of papers spread out on the table, my proof of sacrifice, my years of silence. I gathered them up slowly, stacked them in my hands, then walked to the fireplace. The embers were still glowing faintly from earlier. I tossed the stack in, one envelope at a time, and watched as the flames caught, curling the edges of the paper, devouring the ink. The numbers, the receipts, the evidence of my invisible life, they turned to ash before my eyes, and with every flicker I felt lighter. I poured myself a glass of whiskey, not the expensive kind they kept stocked in their bar, but the cheap bottle I'd bought on sale at the corner store. I raised it toward Linda's photo on the mantel. They thought I was just a wallet, I whispered, my voice rough with smoke and emotion. I took a sip, the burn sliding down my throat. Then I straightened in my chair and said it louder, stronger for the empty room to hear. But tonight, I remembered, I'm a man. I sat there with the fire crackling, the whiskey warming me from the inside out, and for the first time in 5 years, I didn't feel like a ghost. I felt alive. The fear was gone. The guilt, too. In its place was something sharper, cleaner, a decision that couldn't be undone. I wasn't going back. Not to the silence, not to the servitude, not to the life where my love was mistaken for obligation. I stayed there late into the night, watching the flames dance, sipping the whiskey, letting the ashes of my sacrifices drift up the chimney into the winter air. Somewhere out there, Ethan and Claire were probably asleep in the house I'd kept standing, but it wasn't my burden anymore. And as the last embers died, I leaned back, closed my eyes, and felt a strange sense of peace, a quiet kind of freedom. Of course, I didn't know then what was coming next. The arrogance, the audacity, the way they'd push back when they realized the gravy train had stopped. But I was ready. For the first time in years, I was ready. The morning after I called the bank, I woke up lighter than I had in years. My head was clearer, my chest wasn't so heavy. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was waking up already defeated. I made myself a simple breakfast, toast and black coffee, and sat by the window, watching the frost melt on the glass. There was a calmness in me, the kind that comes after a storm when the sky finally cracks open. But peace never lasts long when you're tied to people like Claire. By mid-morning, the phone rang. I didn't even need to check the screen. Something in me already knew. I let it ring twice before picking up. Harold. Claire's voice was as cheerful as ever, bright and chipper, like she hadn't spit poison at me just 2 nights before. How are you? I leaned back in my chair, letting her words hang. I'm fine, I said flatly. Well, listen, she said quickly, cutting straight to it. Mom and Dad are flying in today. Their flight lands at 2. Could you do us a favor and pick them up? Ethan's swamped with work and I'm still getting the house ready. The audacity, after everything, after telling me I wasn't welcome at Christmas. After mocking the food I cooked, the stories I told, even Linda's memory. And now she wanted me to chauffeur her parents like I was the family driver. I almost laughed out loud. But instead, I softened my voice the way a hunter does when he doesn't want to spook his prey. Of course, I said, I can do that. Oh, thank you, Harold, she gushed, relief flooding her tone. I knew we could count on you. We hung up, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel trapped by her request. I felt free, because I already knew I wasn't going. 2 o'clock came and went, while her parents stood outside baggage claim with their suitcases, checking their watches and scanning the crowd. I was sitting in my recliner at home. A crossword puzzle lay open in my lap, a hot mug of tea steaming beside me. Every now and then I pictured them there at the airport, her father tugging at his tie, her mother sighing impatiently, Claire calling their cell phones again and again. And I smiled, because finally the inconvenience wasn't mine. Finally, the silence wasn't me biting my tongue. It was them, left to stew in the consequences of their entitlement. I circled the word reclaim in the crossword, chuckling at the irony, because that's exactly what I was doing, reclaiming myself one small act at a time. Around 5, the phone lit up again. Claire. I let it buzz 3 times before answering. Where are you? She snapped, her sweet tone gone, replaced with the sharp edge I'd known all along. They've been waiting at the airport for hours. I sipped my tea. At home, I said simply. What do you mean at home? You said you'd go. I never said when, I replied calmly. I just said I could do it, but then I thought about it, and you know what? I decided I couldn't. Her voice shot up an octave. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is for me? For Ethan. My parents had to take a cab like common people. Like common people, I repeated slowly, almost savoring the words. Funny. That's what you think of me, isn't it? The silence on the other end told me I'd hit the mark. Finally, she hissed. You're going to regret this, Harold. I leaned back, the fire crackling in the fireplace beside me. I already regretted 5 years of giving you everything, not anymore. And then I hung up. The click of the phone was final, like a door slamming shut. I sat there staring at the crossword, my pen tapping lightly against the paper. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel small. I felt something I hadn't in years, satisfied. For so long, I'd been the one sitting alone, humiliated, overlooked. Now, just for once, it was their turn to feel the sting of being dismissed. Their turn to scramble, to explain, to answer for themselves. And maybe that makes me cruel. Maybe it does. But let me tell you, after years of silence, of swallowing pain, of watching them toast with French wine while I counted pennies for milk, watching them sweat was the sweetest relief I could imagine. I finished the crossword, folded the paper, and set it aside. The room was quiet except for the steady tick of the old clock on the wall. I poured myself another cup of tea, sat back, and let the quiet settle in. But deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. Claire wasn't the type to let something like this go. She'd come back harder, louder, more venomous. And she wouldn't just fight me in private. She'd drag my name wherever she could. And that's when I realized the war hadn't ended with me cutting off the mortgage payments. It had just begun. I should have known Claire wouldn't let it end with a missed ride at the airport. People like her don't lick their wounds in silence. They sharpen them into weapons. And sure enough, 3 days later, my name was splashed across the front page of the local paper. Local man abandons elderly couple at airport. The headline nearly made me choke on my coffee. I was sitting in a corner booth at Miller's Cafe, the same place I'd been going to for years. Same chipped mugs, same smell of burnt bacon grease and fresh muffins. But that morning, the air turned sour in my chest. Right there beneath the headline was a photo of me. An old shot someone must have dug off the internet back when I still had my business running. My hair darker, my smile wider. They'd cropped it tight so I looked stern, even cruel. And below it, paragraph after paragraph painting me as some heartless old man who left a vulnerable couple stranded in the middle of winter. They even threw in the weather for drama. Freezing temperatures. The article said, lies. It had been 48 degrees that day, sunny enough that kids were outside riding their bikes. But facts don't matter when people want a villain. I read each line, my knuckles whitening around the paper. According to the story, I was unstable, unpredictable, even dangerous. Cody and Margaret, that's Claire's parents, played the part of helpless victims, talking about how humiliating it was to be abandoned. They made it sound like I dumped them on the side of the highway in a snowstorm. Not a word about why I didn't show. Not a word about the years of checks I'd written, the mortgages I'd carried, the meals I'd skipped so they could host their dinner parties in style. Just me, the monster. I felt the stares before I even looked up. The couple at the counter whispering over their pancakes. The waitress, who usually called me sweetheart, suddenly tight-lipped as she poured my refill. Even old Joe, who I'd known since high school, folded his paper a little too quickly when I caught his eye. The whole cafe seemed to tilt away from me. I wasn't Harold Jensen, the carpenter who'd fixed half their porches and built half their sheds. I wasn't the man who donated free labor to the church roof after the hailstorm. I was just the headline now. The guy who left an elderly couple standing alone with their bags. I folded the paper carefully and set it aside, but the words didn't leave me. They clung like smoke, filling every breath. For years, my silence had been my shield. I didn't complain, I didn't fight back, I just kept giving. And now, that silence had become a weapon turned against me. I pushed back from the booth, leaving a couple of crumpled bills on the table. As I walked out, I swear I heard one man mutter, "Shame." Maybe I imagined it, but the way the room stayed quiet as I passed told me I wasn't wrong. Outside, the December air cut colder than usual. Not the kind of cold that comes from weather, but the kind that seeps in when you realize the world thinks the worst of you. I walked down Main Street, my boots scuffing the sidewalk. People nodded politely, but their eyes said different. Pity, suspicion. Some didn't look at all, and in that moment I understood something I hadn't before. It wasn't just my family that had shut me out. It was everyone. That night, sitting alone at my kitchen table, I pulled the paper back out and read it again. Each sentence felt like a nail in the coffin of who I used to be. The generous father, the dependable neighbor, the man who showed up, all erased in a single headline. I whispered to the empty room, "They don't even know me." And the silence that followed was louder than any insult. I thought about Linda then. She used to tell me, "Harold, people will forget what you give, but they'll remember who you are." I'd built my whole life on that, being the man who showed up, who provided, who kept his word. But this time, showing up had turned into servitude, providing had turned into being used, and keeping my word. Well, Claire and her parents twisted that into a leash. For the first time, I saw it clear. I wasn't just fighting for my dignity with my son or my daughter-in-law. I was fighting to get back my name, my place in the world. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling, listening to the old house creak around me. "They think they can write me off in a few paragraphs," I muttered. "But the story isn't theirs to write, it's mine." And with that thought, something hardened in me. If they wanted to drag me through the mud in public, then I'd bring the truth into the light, all of it. The checks, the statements, the years of sacrifice that no headline could erase. Because the real betrayal wasn't just that my son turned me away from Christmas. It wasn't that Claire mocked Linda's memory. It was that now, the whole town believed their lies. And that hurt worse than anything. But sometimes, when the world paints you as the villain, the only way to survive is to stop hiding and tell your side of the story, loud enough that no one can ignore I. Christmas Eve came sharp and cold, the kind of night where every house on the block glowed warm with lights and laughter. Every house but mine. I sat at my kitchen table in a suit I hadn't worn since Linda's funeral. Navy blue, pressed as best I could, still carrying the faint smell of cedar from the closet. In front of me lay the leather briefcase, stuffed full of papers I'd gathered over the past month. Bank statements, receipts, canceled checks, printouts of Claire's social media posts bragging about our new granite countertops. Our vacation in Maui, our lavish parties, all of it built on my back. At 6:30 sharp, I slid the stack inside, snapped the clasps shut, and picked up my coat. My reflection in the hallway mirror looked older than I remembered, hair thinner, lines deeper, but my eyes carried something I hadn't seen in years, resolve. Tonight the story wasn't theirs to tell. Tonight I was taking it back. The Jensen house was lit up like a postcard. Cars lined the street, every window spilling golden light into the frozen dark. I could hear laughter and clinking glasses before I even stepped onto the porch. My hand lingered on the doorknob for half a breath, then I turned it. Just like I knew it would be, it was unlocked. Claire always loved bragging about how safe their neighborhood was. The warmth hit me first. The second thing was the silence that followed when I stepped into the dining room. 12 faces turned at once, neighbors, co-workers, friends, forks hovering in midair, conversations dying on their lips. Claire froze with a glass of wine in her hand. Ethan's jaw went slack. And across the table, Cody and Margaret, her parents, looked as though they'd seen a ghost walk straight out of their newspaper smear campaign. "Good evening," I said evenly, setting the briefcase on their marble sideboard. "I hope you don't mind if I join your Christmas celebration." Claire was the first to find her voice. "Harold, this is completely inappropriate. You need to leave. Now." Instead of answering, I opened the briefcase and pulled out the first stack of documents. The sound of paper hitting polished wood was louder than any shout. I moved around the table, placing one packet in front of each guest. "What is this?" one woman asked, curiosity already tugging at her as she flipped the first page. "Receipts," I said. 5 years' worth. Every mortgage payment, $2,800 month after month. The down payment from my home equity loan. The new roof, the hardwood floors, the kitchen aid mixer that cost $2,000 and got used twice. The Christmas lights glowing outside this very house. All of it paid for not by Ethan and Claire but by me. The room filled with the soft rustle of pages. Forks were set down, glasses paused midair. I watched faces shift, confusion giving way to shock, shock sliding into something uglier. "This can't be right," muttered one of Ethan's co-workers, his eyes darting between the statements and Ethan's face. Ethan said nothing. He sat stiff, hands folded in his lap, staring down at the table as though the grain of the wood might swallow him whole. I pulled out the next stack, the newspaper article. And when I finally said enough was enough, this family repaid me by turning me into a villain. I spread the copies across the table. "Here's the story you all probably read. And here," I tapped the margins where I'd scrawled in red ink, "is what really happened. No snowstorm, no abandoned strangers. Just Claire's parents left waiting at the airport because I refused to play chauffeur one more time." The silence broke like glass. "Claire." A woman near the end of the table said, her voice sharp. "Is this true?" Claire's perfect composure faltered, her cheeks flushed. She opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. "It's complicated. Complicated," I echoed. "You took over $200,000 from me while mocking the way I talk, the food I cook, even my late wife. Complicated doesn't cover it." Margaret leaned forward, her tone dripping with authority. "This is a private family matter. You have no right to drag it into private." I cut in, my voice rising. "You made it public when you planted that article. You dragged my name through the mud for everyone in this town to see. You called me unstable, dangerous, a cruel old man who left you to suffer. You wanted the whole world to judge me. Fine. Let's give them the full story." The guests shifted uncomfortably, murmuring among themselves. Some shot Claire looks sharp enough to cut glass. Others just stared at Ethan, waiting for him to defend himself, to defend me, his father. But Ethan kept silent, shame written across his face. One of Cody's business acquaintances slammed his packet shut. "Cody, is this why you invited us here tonight? To parade around in a house you didn't even pay for, to humiliate your wife's father?" "No," Cody stammered, color draining from his cheeks. "It's not. This isn't how it looks." "It's exactly how it looks," I said. And then I dropped the last words, the ones that cut through the noise like a blade through silk. "This isn't about money. It's about respect. And tonight, the truth finally has a seat at this table." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the explosion came. Voices overlapped, accusations flew, chairs scraped against hardwood. Guests demanded explanations, some already standing to leave. Claire tried to shout over the chaos, her voice cracking. Margaret hissed at her to say something, anything. Cody sputtered, but the words died in his throat. And Ethan, my son, still sat silent. I looked at him one last time. Then I closed my briefcase, straightened my tie, and walked to the door. Behind me, the Christmas dinner unraveled into shouting, the kind of chaos no amount of fine wine or granite countertops could patch back together. As I stepped into the cold December night, I heard a neighbor's voice rise above the rest. Outrageous, absolutely outrageous. I didn't need to know whether he meant me or them. For the first time in years, it didn't matter, because tonight I hadn't just told the truth, I'd shown it. And no headline, no whisper in a cafe, no smug smile from Claire could take that away. 3 months passed before I saw Ethan again. By then, the house I'd mortgaged my own future to build for him was gone, foreclosed, sold off by the bank to some young couple starting fresh. Claire had packed her things in the middle of the night, too embarrassed to face the neighbors who once praised her for her taste and her connections. Cody and Margaret tried to salvage their reputation, but the truth travels fast in a small town. They'd gone from hosting charity luncheons to being quietly left off invitation lists. People cross the street now when they see them coming. And me, I slept better. I ate better. I walked through town without ducking my head. Some folks still looked at me sideways, remembering the article instead of the dinner showdown. But plenty more had heard the truth. My silence was gone, and with it, the weight that had kept me hunched for years. It was a Thursday evening when the knock came. I opened the door to find Ethan on my porch. He looked like a man 10 years older than his 35. His suit was wrinkled, his tie missing, dark circles under his eyes. His hands fidgeted like a boy's, not a man's. "Dad," he said softly, "can we talk?" I stepped aside. He walked in slow, like the house itself might judge him. He glanced around at the fresh paint on the walls, the new recliner, the small touches I'd finally been able to afford since cutting the cord on his mortgage. "Nice place," he murmured. "It's what happens," I said, lowering myself into my chair, "when you stop pouring into someone else's pockets and start fixing your own roof." He sat across from me on the edge of the couch like a visitor who wasn't sure he belonged. For a long minute, neither of us spoke. Then finally, his voice cracked. "I lost you, didn't I?" I met his eyes, steady. "No, Ethan, you didn't lose me, you gave me away." The words hung heavy in the room. He flinched, like they'd struck something raw. His hands covered his face, his shoulders shaking. When he finally looked up again, tears streaked down. "Dad, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for Christmas, for letting Claire," he swallowed hard, "for letting her talk about Mom the way she did, for not standing up when you needed me most, for being a coward." I let the silence stretch because apologies aren't bandages. They don't fix what's broken, they just admit it was broken to begin with. "You know what the hardest part was?" I asked finally. Not the money, not the lies. It was realizing I'd raised a man who let others decide my worth. That hurt worse than writing every check. He bowed his head. "I don't know how to make it right." "You can't make it right," I said, firm but not unkind. "That money's gone. Those years are gone. What matters now is what you do from here." He looked up at me, eyes searching. "You mean there's still a chance?" "There's always a chance," I said. "But don't confuse forgiveness with forgetting. I forgive you, Ethan, truly, but forgiveness doesn't mean going back. Respect is the only way forward." He nodded slowly, absorbing each word like it was a verdict he'd been waiting months to hear. "Respect," he whispered. "That's the real inheritance," I told him. "Not houses, not cars, not money, respect. Without it, even millions are worthless." He sat back, shoulders sagging, but for the first time a glimmer of something, maybe hope, returned to his face. We talked for another hour. Not about money, not about Claire, not about the wreckage behind us. We talked about fishing trips we never took. About the way Linda used to hum in the kitchen while making cornbread. About simple things I thought he'd forgotten. When he finally stood to leave, he lingered by the door. "I don't expect this to be easy," he said. "But I'll show you, Dad. I'll earn it back." I nodded. "One day at a time, that's how respect is built." After he left, the house settled into quiet again. But it wasn't the heavy, lonely quiet I'd grown used to. It was softer. Like maybe a door had opened, even if it was just a crack. That Sunday, my sister Rosa invited me over for dinner. Her house was alive with noise, her grandkids chasing each other down the hall, the smell of pot roast filling the air. When I walked in, one of the little ones threw her arms around my legs. "Uncle Harold," she squealed. I laughed, scooping her up. For the first time in years, the laughter felt free. We gathered around Rosa's table, nothing fancy, no granite, no imported wine, just family, real family, people who wanted me there not because of what I could pay for but because of who I was. I raised my glass of sweet tea, looking around the table. "Respect," I said quietly. "That's the real inheritance." They didn't need the backstory. They just smiled and clinked glasses because they understood. And for the first time since Linda passed, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. So if you're listening to this story, maybe you've been there too, taken for granted, used, or shut out by the very people you gave everything to. Let me tell you, your worth isn't in the checks you write. It isn't in the sacrifices nobody sees. It's in the respect you demand and the love you choose to give to those who deserve it. Because money fades, houses crumble, but respect, that's the one inheritance nobody can take from you. And as for me, I'll spend the rest of my days making sure I give and receive nothing less. Merry Christmas, my friends. I hope this season brings you warmth, respect, and the kind of family that pulls you closer instead of pushing you out. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe. There are more stories coming, stories about love, betrayal, and the quiet justice of fathers like me. Until then, take care of yourselves and take care of each other.